Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by Dave. JL is producing, but we won't be hearing from him this week. On today's show, even though we are into the summer months and a Stanley Cup champion has been crowned, no shortage of Rangers news and rumors to chat about. I think also I do want to, just touch briefly on the fact that the Panthers have now won consecutive Stanley Cups, and maybe what we can learn from them that a team like the Rangers can bring forward as they try to build to become that, right? A perennial contender and a team that can compete to win maybe not just one Stanley Cup, although probably not worth it to get ahead of ourselves, right? So Dave, on this very hot and sweltering, almost summer's evening as we record here, how are you doing?
I am great. Like I was telling you before we started recording, my girls were off today. We had a great day. They were out by the pool for most of the afternoon. In the morning, we went to a little coffee house place that has a giant kids play area, and we spent 2 hours there. They were great. They were happy. And then they both went to bed on time, and they both fell asleep pretty quickly. So I'm good. I got nothing to complain about.
Something happens. Even young kids, right, seem to know when like summer starts, and it just improves their mood, right?
Oh
Where I
yeah.
live, my neck of the woods today was the last day of public school, so a lot of kids in the neighborhood in celebratory mode for sure. All right, so like I said, Dave, lots to get to here. Let's start with, it was kind of funny, today's Thursday as we record. You're gonna be listening to this on Friday, but early in the morning, getting up, starting to go about my day, you send us a text message in the group chat with a link to Peter Baugh's latest. I don't know if it's appropriate to call it an expose, but certainly the latest eulogy, we can certainly call it, of the 2024-25 Rangers. Kind of an extensive piece in The Athletic that covers most of the last 12 months, everything that went down from the Goodrow waiving, the Trouba trade, the Kakko trade, all the way up to and including the Kreider trade, and just how that has fundamentally reshaped the Rangers. So, Dave, what were your thoughts as you were reading through that piece, and anything interesting or new that came out of it from your standpoint?
So I was under the impression, obviously, that the players were upset. And obviously, this article basically gave us all the quotes behind it. And that checks out. I mean, that wasn't new. For me, what stood out was, and this is something I harped about basically the entire season, was how bad Chris Drury was at communicating and managing his people. I'm not talking about the players as assets. I'm talking about the players as people. How bad he was at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to make sure that, yes, you're building a Stanley Cup contender, and at this point, you're just throwing too much shit at the wall, seeing what's sticking. But the other part of your job is to take a pulse of the locker room, listen to your coach, get a pulse of the locker room, and not be a distraction. You should be in the background, not making headlines. Have you ever seen, I was about to say Barry Zito, Bill Zito in Florida make headlines?
Bill Zito.
I was about to say Barry Zito. Yeah, I got Moneyball in my mind. Have you ever seen Bill Zito make headlines? Who's the GM of the Oilers? Help me out here.
Oh, isn't it Ken? Is it Ken Holland?
Ken Holland? No way. Ken Holland built that team?
I think so. Wow.
Really? Oh,
look at us. I'm looking at it up.
Well, he does make headlines, but mostly because of his terrible moves. Anyway, back to my original point. Have you ever seen Bill Zito, GM of the Florida Panthers, who now won 2 Stanley Cups in a row? Have you ever seen him make headlines? Steve Yzerman. Have you ever seen him make headlines? Julien Brisebois. Have you ever seen him make headlines? No. Drury's making headlines. That's not your job. Shut up. Do your job. And yes, I'm focusing on Drury because I know you're going to focus on the players after this. but do your job, and that's get a pulse and don't piss off the players so they mutiny against you.
100%. And so, by the way, it is actually Stan Bowman, but that was only a
Oh,
year
okay.
ago, July 24th, 24. He was hired. So it was Ken Holland that built a good chunk of that Oiler team. And then
Interesting.
and Stan Bowman came in and has been doing the job for the better part of the last year. But so there was one slight, I mean, look, the main, and it was in the headline, right? The main, direct quote that sort of will grab everybody's attention from this article was, "No one here is happy," which was very funny because, and I was joking with some friends, like by March, that should have been like the slogan at MSG that they play after the hype video right before the game starts. Like that's how bad it got, that like, they should have been showing a blooper reel with the tagline, "No one here is happy," to get everybody ready for Ranger hockey at the Garden. So, but that came from one of the players that was in the meeting where supposedly Drury cleared the air with the leadership team, right? So the memo goes out after the two bad games in Western Canada. The locker room is clearly up in arms. And then when they get back to the practice facility at the end of the road trip, Drury calls a meeting with the leadership team. The Rangers put out a statement, or not, they didn't put out a statement, but they clearly leaked it to the media, their side of the story, which was that, they had, quote, honest and productive conversation. And some player texted the reporter from The Athletic and said, "I was in the meeting, productive, question mark. No one here is happy." So that gives you a sense of how the players felt coming out of that meeting. And, and as much as that's kind of a funny quote, that's not news. We knew that the players weren't happy. They were wearing it on their faces and they were showing it on the ice all season. Dave, I couldn't agree with you more about let's call it like the soft skills, non-hockey side of this by Drury, which is the roster moves he made were actually good hockey moves, right? We know that Barclay Goodrow was a net negative on the ice. His metrics in his final season with the Rangers were abysmal. He was not producing at all in the regular season, though he did have 5 enormous playoff goals. And look, he should be given credit for that. But
Yes,
we knew that his impact over 82 games was not going to be good. And that was a $3.6 million hole that could be filled with, in theory, better, more productive players. Jacob Trouba also became an anchor, right? He was holding Keandre Miller back to the point now where we don't even know what Keandre Miller can be, because I think one of those things where, similar to what happened to Ryan McDonough here with Dan Girardi after a while, it started to negatively affect the better partners play. Trouba was bad on the ice, not a good leader, right? When it came to the aftermath of the summer. And he was making $8.5 million. And that was, again, cap space that the Rangers felt that they needed. So the irony here is that Drury made the right hockey moves, but he so severely messed with let's just call it what it is, vibe of the team, that it torpedoed the entire season. And look, we spent all season saying our piece about this, that the players were ultimately to blame. And I still think that they were. They're the ones who need to put this stuff to the side, realize that it's not, their responsibility to make roster moves, and go be the best players that they can be. This clearly affected them. So, it's funny too, as we talk about this against the backdrop of Florida winning their 2nd consecutive cup, having been to their 3rd consecutive final. What I think is so interesting as a contrast is, everybody says, well, you just have to, and it's not that it's easy, right? But let's do what Florida did, right? Let's make our big swing for a star player. Let's make those deadline moves for guys like Marchand, Seth Jones, right? To bring in star players when you have the cap space to do it at the deadline. But the thing is that Florida already had a really good foundation in place, right? And all that happened, or what happened when they brought in Tkachuk, Bennett, was they kind of like locked the culture into place. And Paul Maurice kind of ended up being the perfect guy for that as well. And I think he really just, frankly, hit his stride as a coach in these last, few seasons with this group of players. I think they've brought the best out of him. So there is a very synergistic thing there. And you can tell there's alignment between the front office, the coaching staff, and the players. The Rangers have had none of that. So even while they in theory should have had a better roster on paper, even just through addition by subtraction of the net negatives of Goodrow and Trouba. It went the opposite way. So I just find that very interesting. And I think, again, as you look at what Florida's done, it's, it's not an easy thing to replicate.
Yep. And it's more than just the players suiting up every night. And I know every time I look at the comments, every time I look at social media, it's how come we don't have a Sam Bennett? How come we don't have Matt Tkachuk? And yeah, Tkachuk aside, because he's Matt Tkachuk. The Rangers' flaws, aside from what you said, is they will never be more than the sum of their parts. And Rob, this is something you said I want to say December. They're never going to be more than the sum of their parts as long as there is that disconnect. And Florida doesn't have that disconnect between GM, coach, and players. Florida is straight through. Everybody's on the same page. You know exactly what kind of players they want and how to get there. The Rangers have an analytics department telling them one thing. They have a GM making other decisions. They have a coach three now coaches who've been like, what are you doing with the roster? And then they have players getting caught in the middle who eventually get sick of it, and last season happens. The foundation for the Rangers is not success. It seems like this was brewing for a while. And if you look at Drury's history with, yes, I know Elias Anderson and Vitaly Kravtsov were busts, but beyond that, the way he handled them as people, we should have seen this coming as fans. We really should have. And I'm going to keep going back and forth with the players and the GM because they're both at fault, although I do think last year the players deserve 70-30% of the share.
I think that's right. It's so funny you say that too, right? Like, where's our Sam Bennett? I mean, up until this season, in the regular season, Sam Bennett had never scored over 50 points. Before joining Florida, right? He was with Calgary all those years. His career high was in his first full season. He had 36 points. He had 18 goals and 18 assists. The Rangers have had a lot of Sam Bennett's, actually. They've had plenty of guys that have come in here and, with decent and scored 35 points. That is not the issue. The issue is, like you said, they have not had an identity. And that's another buzzword. And these are the things that, again, I know conversations like this, and I always call him out because I love him. Conversations like this drive Rob Luker nuts, right? Because he will insist that it's all about analytics, or most of it's about analytics. And, but my counter argument to that would be, well, you got rid of Barclay Goodrow, who was analytically one of your worst players. You got rid of Jacob Trouba, analytically one of your worst players, and the team stunk, right? Forget about Will Borgen. And I'm just talking about the supposed addition by subtraction. They did this with Dan Girardi, by the way, a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And when they signed Kevin Shattenkirk, and everybody said, oh, they got rid of Girardi. He was their worst player. He was a black hole. And that was the end of 10 worst 5-on-5 players on the team. We're signing Kevin Shattenkirk. We're going to be 50% better. And that did not happen, because it is not just about stacking players with good Corsi and expected goals numbers. I want them to do that. I want them to continue to look for undervalued players, but also players that fit the culture. And again, the other buzzword, which is identity. And ultimately, that's what this team has lacked. And I'm hoping that is the biggest impact that Mike Sullivan will have, is that he will instill an identity, and that you will know. And look, again, I keep tangentially going back to this. When the Rangers were actually contenders in 2012 through 2015, who was the foundation of that identity of that team? It was John Tortorella, right? John Tortorella came in, and they became a really hard-nosed defense first type of hockey team, the black and blue shirts. That was their identity. They were, and they played it to a T. And basically the seeds for those two cup runs in 2014 and 15 were sown by Torts. Obviously Vigneault was the guy who carried it out. And I think that was the right move at the time, to bring in a coach like AV who could maximize the scoring ability of the players they had on the team, but there was still an identity and a foundation. This team has none of that. And Sure, I think that that's probably on the coaches that they've brought in. I don't think Gallant or Laviolette was particularly good or even particularly bothered by that. But that also ultimately falls on the GM because the GM is the one who holds the grand vision for the team. The GM is the one is the one who's supposed to say, like, this is my vision for the hockey team. This is how I think we can compete in our conference, how I think we can compete in the playoffs, how I think we can beat the top 4 teams in the West for a Stanley Cup, right? Beyond, we have a great goalie and our best 5 players are going to be on the ice during power plays, and they're pretty damn good at that. There was never an identity with this era of the Rangers. And the first thing they need to do is establish an identity under Mike Sullivan. So any other thoughts, Dave? I mean, anything else from that piece, or do we want to move on to some of the other bits and pieces?
I really hate harping on 24-25. And it's funny, we didn't plan on talking about this until that article dropped. So I'm so sick of last season. I'm done. 2024 was a shit year to begin with, at least personally for me. So let's move on. I'm done with that crappy ass team.
Love it. And I was going to say, I called it a eulogy more so than an expose, because there really wasn't that much fresh reporting. Although I think The Athletic, they do a really good job. You know, it makes sense that an article like that came out a little bit after the season ended, because I think they do, you know, make sure that their quotes are verified, that, you know, their stuff is pretty well sourced. So I think Peter does a great job. Obviously, Arthur Staple's no longer with The Athletic, so it's probably just Peter covering the team now. So kudos to them for a well-written piece. And there was plenty in there that made it, you know, worth reading for Ranger fans. If you think you're right, Dave, I think it's time, and let's call it right now. We are now burying the 2024-25 New York Rangers. We're done with them. We're not going to talk about them anymore. I'm drawing a line in the sand.
It's a soft line, though, because we never know what the hell else is going to come out. We never know. I mean, let's be real. We never know who's going to get traded, who's just going to finally unleash.
Right. But at the same time, you know, everything they do is about putting this year in the past, right? So any player that's traded is, you know, is for better or worse in the past. All right. So let's talk about a guy who will be here for the next 2 years, Matt Rempe. He signed a 2-year extension, so that takes him out of restricted free agency. You know, Larry Brooks was convinced he might be an offer sheet target, which was really funny.
Load of crap.
Classic Larry Brooks clickbait there. Well, I think he was just trying to get that was him playing around the edges of reality to get some clicks, I think.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
Rempe's in 2 years, $975,000 cap hit. Dave, what are your initial thoughts on this contract extension?
It's fine. I don't know why everybody was so up in arms about it. It's fine. He still is waiver exempt next season. He has shown a willingness to improve and learn and work and work and work. The guys love him. He's basically the team mascot. If you're talking about rebuilding a vibe and an identity, you start there. Even if he doesn't play 82 games, start with something small and work yourself up. People also, he's only 22 years old. People were going and making way too much out of this contract. It's 2 years, less than $1 million. If you're complaining about this, go touch grass. Please don't disagree with me, because I'm going to feel like a dick if you do.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. This is really not anything that is. I agree with you in the sense that, like, how is this even debatable? I mean, the cap is going up. It's going to be, I think, 93 or 95 million next year. So that means this contract at $975,000 is a little more than 1% of the cap, right? Is my math right there, Dave?
Yeah, it's 1% of the cap. 1%, less than 1% of the cap. Wait, no, a little bit more than 1% of the cap.
Right. So a little bit more than 1% of the cap. So, and yeah, I mean, look, the guy is and the other thing that I'll say about this is that I don't think Ranger fans are giving enough thought or credence to the fact that they have a new coach. And the reason I bring that up is any analysis that you do, whether it is analytics based, whether it's eye test based, otherwise, needs to start and end with the fact that Mike Sullivan is now the coach of this hockey team. And that is going to make a huge difference, even with somebody like Matt Rempe, because Matt Rempe is going to be employed differently and used differently by Mike Sullivan than he was by Peter Laviolette, who very clearly plugged him into the lineup when he felt the team needed a jolt. And then if he played well enough, he kept his spot. I think Sullivan might be more strategic with Rempe. I think he might actually have a role in terms of like being an effective forechecker. I also think he's not going to play all 82 games. And ultimately, I'm excited to see. Yeah, no, look, ultimately, I'm excited to see Rempe under Sullivan. And I think that, could represent or could help him get to the next, kind of phase of his game. And I think I just want people to put a little bit more weight behind the impact that Mike Sullivan might have on this team when you're thinking about the types of moves they're making, the players they're bringing in, because I think he's going to have a massive effect on the team individually and as a whole.
And to piggyback off of that, that's a huge hole in a lot of the analytics and analytical analysis. Jesus, I can't talk today. That's a problem with the whole analytics aspect of this game. There we go. Analytics aspect of this game. I can talk now. It's very useful, and we need these numbers. But there are two things that I don't think are accounted for enough. One is systems and how, say, a hybrid man zone system impacts high danger chances against versus how a simpler zone defense system with aggressive back checking impacts rush chances and high danger chances against. And this is the reason why I named those two specifically is hybrid man zone is what we've seen through AV, Gallant, through Laviolette. Only David Quinn didn't run that. And David Quinn, his system was odd, to say the least. Sullivan simplifies it. He expects you to bust your ass down the ice on the forecheck and back on the back check. We haven't had that, and it does matter because that's where we get to the, being more than the sum of your parts on the ice. If we have full team buy-in on the system, players like Rempe look better. How many times do we talk about the LA Corsi boost or the Florida Corsi boost?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this should apply to the Rangers too. They're going to get a boost from having a coach that actually understands how to address his roster needs through a system that all players buy into and treat his players like human beings. And Laviolette did that for his first season and through the first month of last season. And then, basically everybody mutinied against Drury, and Laviolette was just like, screw this, I'm out. So if we can talk about how badly the Rangers needed a system change and then complain about re-signing guys and not accounting for the coach, it's flawed logic. And I really like that you brought that up because it is missing in everything we're talking. It's missing in the Keandre Miller rumors. It is. Everyone's talking about how they need to dump Keandre Miller. And there are 12 to 15 teams interested in Keandre Miller. If there are 12 to 15 teams interested in Keandre Miller, I think that was from Frank Saravalli. Maybe you might want to reconsider trading him unless there's an actual contractual reason to trade him, which it does sound like there is. So we have to, there's so much more than just the guy on the ice.
I mean, he's a guy that I want to see under this coach. I think that there's so much more there individually. I think that if the game is simplified for him individually, he could really flourish. I mean, he's already got a 40+ points season under his belt. And again, I know you wrote about this a couple of days ago on the blog, Dave, like, if the Rangers were to pursue an offer sheet strategy, they would have to get the 2026 second rounder back. maybe they could use Keandre Miller in that trade and also get an NHLer back. That is like the only scenario I'm interested in if they are trading Miller, because it's netting them 2 NHLers. Any trade that anybody puts out there that is for futures, or like a guy who might be good, like a guy who had a cup of coffee last year and like might be good in a year or two, and a draft pick or two, that makes no sense for me. I'm not interested in that. The bet is play the guy with Adam Fox under Mike Sullivan for 40 games. Just do that. See what happens. Give it 40 games. And if it's bad, then you know it's bad, because if he can't play, look decent in terms of his metrics at the end of last year. Fox and Miller, we know in the first 10, 15 games of last year were one of the best defense pairs in the NHL. Let's just roll with that and let the coach figure everything else out. I understand wanting to separate Fox and Miller so you could have one of them on the ice at all times. I don't think that's the way to go, especially with the team as currently constituted. So, no, I mean, I think, look, the other thing is, and just this is a broadly speaking, the Rangers need to focus on being a good 5-on-5 team, because we just watched another Stanley Cup final and we just watched another Final Four where all 4 teams involved in the Western and Eastern Conference finals were at least top 8 in terms of expected goals percentage. I don't know, maybe someone has to fact check me on that. Certainly I know Edmonton and Florida were pretty high up. I know Dallas. Ultimately that matters. When the Rangers lose in the playoffs, when they get to the conference final and lose, they usually get outchanced very badly at 5-on-5. They usually get completely pinned in their own end for minutes on end. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know. And until they solve that problem and become an actually good 5-on-5 team, they're not a contender. I don't care how many games they win. I don't care how good the power play is. I don't care how good the goalie is. They've got to get better at 5-on-5. And hopefully Mike Sullivan is part of the answer to that. So I know we started this talking about Rempe. We sort of went tangentially into the coach and hopefully his potential impacts. Any other thoughts on Sullivan before we get to some of the rumor?
So I do have something on Sullivan. So tying this to 5-on-5. Okay, Carolina I'm just using Corsi for now. I'll get the expected goals and high dangers in a second. In terms of Corsi, top 2, Carolina, Florida, Edmonton, number 4, Dallas, number 18, but Pittsburgh, number 10.
Oh, wow.
Okay, expected goals. Again, expected goals 4. So Carolina, Florida, Edmonton, 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we're looking at Pittsburgh is 16. Dallas, Dallas was 15. I missed Dallas. High danger share. Edmonton, number 1. Carolina and Florida, again, back-to-back. That's impressive. 6 and 7. And now Pittsburgh, 19. Dallas, did I miss that? Dallas, 12. How do I keep missing Dallas? So,
okay.
I mean, let's be real. Dallas might have been a bit of an anomaly because they weren't that high up. But Pittsburgh, they were a decent 5-on-5 team in terms of shot share. Now, the quality on Pittsburgh mattered, and that's because look at their roster. It wasn't that good. And they're 107 years old combined, roughly. But 5-on-5 matters, and Sullivan is a good 5-on-5 coach. So I would love to see Keandre Miller do it, but like you said, they have to get something viable for him. And I know my pipe dream is Marco Rossi. My fear is they go and get somebody like Ryan Hartman.
Yeah. I mean, not a bad 3C, right?
He's not good. I mean, I have his player card up 41 and 44, respectively, from Evolving Hockey. And I also have his micro stats from all 3 zones. Very good offensive driver, even if it doesn't necessarily show up in Evolving Hockey's stats because his micro stats look good. Gets a lot of deflections, gets a lot of high dangers, a good amount of Royal Road or slot line passes, generates different types of offense, great at zone entries, but not a good forechecker, which is odd, and not really good in terms of defensive zone play for a center, which you kind of need. So he would not be much of an upgrade on Vincent Trocheck as the Rangers' second line center. And I'm of the belief they need Trocheck as the third line center to be a true contender.
Yeah, and one of the other pieces of news that came out this week was we're on the topic of centers is that Mike Sullivan did go meet with Mika Zibanejad. He flew to Sweden, met with him, and probably discussed his role with him. Right, so we'll see what that means. We obviously do not know if they envision him as a winger. He was more productive for sure, and it's Sullivan's call. The whole purpose of the meeting was like, hey, this is our vision for you. Are you on board with it? So in that, if that's the case, look, if he is the second line center, then your centers are Miller, Zibanejad, Trocheck. Again, on paper, that's not bad. It's not bad at all. Now, they have to execute. Zibanejad has to prove that he is a viable top six center. Now, look, he did get caved by Crosby. He had trouble with Barkov. But he's also been an extremely productive Ranger. I know Nick wrote that piece for the blog about, kind of Zibanejad versus Kreider and how, everybody kind of does fawn over Kreider. He was very close to breaking a bunch of records. Zibanejad's not that far off those same records. So, interesting discussion there. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about Mika as the season approaches, and maybe we get a little bit more of a sense of his role. So on the rumor mill, Dave, the names that you've brought up as the Rangers are most likely in the market for a left-handed defenseman that can play with Adam Fox. I think it should just be Keandre Miller, but my opinion means nothing to the Rangers, and that's fine. They don't pay me, not yet at least. Vladislav Gavrikov and Ivan Provorov. So, Dave, give me your overview of both of these players. Yeah, I don't like either of them, but give me your thoughts on this. These are the guys that they are potentially targeting to be Adam Fox's partner.
Ivan Provorov is not a good hockey player. He's not, and he's projected to get 6 years or 5 years at $6.5 million. Give me a freaking break. I'm trying not to curse as much. I know that I opened it up probably by making this podcast on the mature side based off Apple's ratings. But if they go out and they trade Keandre Miller for insert player here, to go fill his spot with Ivan Provorov, are you kidding me? He is not a good hockey player. And yes, the coaching aspect of it, we still need to account for that. But I am not taking a flyer on a 30-year-old defenseman on a 6-year contract who is going to make Keandre Miller money, 10 years older, and nowhere near as good. No, flat out no. And if that's the issue, if that's what he does, Drury deserves to be fired into his son by one of those Acme slingshots that Wile E. Coyote always fails with. Gavrikov, on the other hand, is a good hockey player. I like him. We talked about the LA Corsi boost. I wonder how much of that is playing into some of his numbers from this year. And I forgot, I think it was JL who brought that up last week, who said that's something to watch for. And again, coaching matters. We'll see what Sullivan does. But I'm terrified of that contract too. He's 29, 30, something like that. And he's projected to get a 7-year deal. I mean, I think they can do better than committing that kind of money and that kind of term to one guy who's not only a crappy hockey player, but a crappy human, and another guy who was mediocre until this past year in LA. I mean, what are we doing here? Why is this always what we do as Ranger fans, where we go and we trade a defenseman that did not look good in New York. He goes and becomes a fairly successful defenseman, and they go and sign a guy forever, and then we were repeating the same process. And this issue goes all the way to the top. This is a Dolan thing at this point because it goes across multiple GMs and too many coaches. But I'm sick and tired of this. Can we break the cycle and can we start actually having a plan and not throwing shit at a wall and hoping something sticks and smells like roses? All right, I'm done with my rant.
There are names out there. No, good rant. There are names out there that two come to my mind right off the bat. Where if you could clear up a little bit more cap space, I know that's an issue, but Nate Schmidt. The other one, which I think people might have mixed feelings about this. Yeah, he is good, but he's a veteran, and he's over 30. I think he's probably 34, 35 at this point, and
yeah, but you can give him a 1 or a 2 year deal, not 7.
All right, so here, let me go slow, and I'll let you react. Do you have the Nate Schmidt contract projection in front of you?
Evolving Hockey has him at 4 years, $3.6 million. I can't imagine him getting that. He's 35 years old.
Okay. What about Ryan McDonough?
Isn't McDonough signed through next season?
Maybe. I thought he was a free agent.
What team is he on now?
He's Tampa. He went back to Tampa.
He went back.
Tampa Bay.
Keep up with this shit. Ryan McDonough has 1 more year left at $6.75 million.
Right. Okay. So they'd have to retain and I don't think the Rangers are going to do that. Make a trade. That doesn't make any sense.
Nope. I would like maybe they could send Carson Saucy over there.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Right. But why would Tampa do that? I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Tampa has a way of doing things that on their face don't look great, and then they end up working out great for them. So, no. Look, I'm not. I'd almost rather this sounds crazy. I would almost rather the Rangers stand pat with Miller, Zach Jones, and Urho Vakanainen, and frankly, Matthew Robertson. Like, this whole season should be about evaluating what you have in your organization and seeing what Mike Sullivan thinks of these guys. This is the ultimate clean slate opportunity for everybody. Like, a guy like Zach Jones, such a good example, right? He's been through multiple coaches. No one's given him a real shot. Drury clearly likes him. Drury keeps re-signing him. They keep him on the roster. He's been on the NHL roster for most of the last 2 seasons. Like, how about let's give him a full-time shot? Let's just give him 82 games and see what he could do with it. So I'm much more for standing pat, keeping powder dry going into the trade deadline and next season than giving some middling defenseman $7 million for 7 years. That never works. It never works. Why would it work now?
But Rob, Zach Jones is 5'11".
Okay. And you have a point. So listen,
no. There is no point. This is a stupid point. Sorry. No, but again, I don't know how this is syncing up with the lag, but this is a dumb point that people make. He's short. Who cares? He's good.
I think in this case, Drury agrees with you. Like, I think that despite the size or the lack of size, that they like him, that Drury likes him. And I would like to see him get a full-time opportunity. I don't think he is a 7th defenseman necessarily. I think he could be a solid 3rd pair left defenseman, maybe even a 2nd pair left defenseman in the right scheme, in the right system. Especially up front. And it's something that we should keep an eye on. But Zach Jones, yes, a little bit undersized, but deserves a chance. And again, like I'll say again, like, let's see what Matthew Robertson gives you in a few games. I mean, no one had heard of Victor Mancini at this time last year, going into the summer and going into training camp. No one was not a pick that anybody really liked. And he basically proved that he could be an NHLer right off the bat. He got an opportunity and he ran with it. So, Robertson, maybe a little bit of a late bloomer. Defensemen take longer to develop. Let's see how he does in training camp under Sullivan. I don't think it makes sense to give Gavrikov or certainly Provorov a long-term deal.
So do you think Drury, Sullivan, and Dolan will sign on for a punted year?
No. I think that they have to be in the mix for a wild card spot. I mean, also look there. I don't think there's going to be consequences unless this thing goes off the rails again, and there's the mutiny again. Drury's job is safe, so they would just continue dismantling the team at that point. But I don't see them punting this year, and I don't think they need to punt this year. I mean, look at the teams that beyond. I mean, look, the East isn't that great beyond Carolina, who frankly the Rangers, Washington's going to regress. Obviously, Florida is the class of the league. Tampa Bay is really good still. Other than those teams, I mean, look, Toronto's great in the regular season, but they can't get over the playoff hump. Once you get into the middle of the pack in the top 8, once you get to the 4th or 5th spot, the Rangers have Igor Shesterkin, Adam Fox, JT Miller, Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin for one more season at least. That alone puts them in the conversation for 3rd in the Metro and a wildcard spot. So I don't even if your starting opening night left defense stable is Miller, Jones, and Vakanainen. I believe that's true. I believe that.
I'm with you. I wish they would give Miller time with Fox, more time, because they looked real good to start last season. I am indifferent on the right side because obviously Fox is Fox, but Borgen is, I don't know what the hell Borgen is. And Schneider, hopefully that shoulder, hopefully that shoulder thing from Schneider means he becomes the second pair defenseman, which means, we're paying $20 million for Will Borgen to be a 3rd pair defenseman. But that's neither here nor there at this point. I honestly, the defense outside of Fox is a train wreck. And what do you have to lose? Again, just to reiterate what, Rob, you were saying, what do you have to lose by just seeing what Keandre Miller can do? Maybe those inklings that were said about Miller wanting to leave New York, wanting to test free agency, only wanting 2 years, maybe that changes under Sullivan. Obviously, you can't bank on a maybe, and you got to strike while the iron's hot if those are true rumors. But give Zach Jones a chance at least. Give him a real chance. A real chance. 40 games in a row on a team that isn't mutinying with a solid coach. Give him a chance. He's going to cost, $1 million? What if he turns into your second pair of left defensemen and him and either Schneider or Borgen turn into a solid pair? What are you going to get for Jones? A 4th round pick?
Just I mean, again, nothing. 100%. And look, I disagree. I don't think it's a train wreck. I think it is Adam Fox and a bunch of question marks. So it's potentially a train wreck. Sure. If all 6 of those players beneath him on the depth chart are bad, then yes, they will have a terrible defense. But there's a lot of unknown there. There's a lot of potential with Keandre Miller. There is some good with Will Borgen. You just need steadiness there. You need 13, 14 minutes of steady play. He's a decent, he's a decent enough player. I mean, he made the Finland Four Nations team, right? I mean, maybe that's more the state of Finnish hockey than it is anything else, but he made the Finland Four Nations team. So, there's a lot of volatility there, because certainly you're right, Dave. Like if and Fox himself, right? If Fox has another down year in NHL, and you don't want to go into a season with that many question marks, but I do think that it is worth it to find out what you have, as opposed to make a long-term commitment and just lock yourself into something that's just going to look and feel like the Jacob Trouba contract again, because you know how that story ends. That story has been written a million times for the New York Rangers, and it never ends well. So why do that again? Why not make small bets on the guys you have in-house, make the moves, and that's what I'll say, rather than go sign someone when they're 30 off of one good season. If there's a big swing to be made for a young player, a younger player on a number that's doable, then you do that. But I think you got to try and build this, from internally, as opposed to go out and find someone in free agency. I don't see it working.
Especially with a crappy free agent class.
Right. Well, right. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, look, ultimately there's a lot of work for the Rangers to do here as we head into, amazingly, draft week, right? So a week from today, if you're listening to this on Friday, the draft is taking place. We will find out, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, on Wednesday, if the Rangers are keeping their pick.
Yes, and I do believe that decision will answer a lot of questions we're talking about here about what next year is going to bring, where if the Rangers keep their pick, and assuming offer sheets aren't realistic, sorry, let me back that up. If the Rangers give this year's pick to Pittsburgh and keep next year's pick, so they give the 12 overall to Pittsburgh and they keep next year's pick, and we assume that offer sheets aren't a real possibility, then we know the Rangers expect to be worse next year.
Mm-hmm.
That decision plays a major role in their offseason plans, and I don't think that decision gets made until they see what they get for Keandre Miller.
Do you think that they're going to trade Miller? If they're going to trade Miller, it's within the next 5 days.
I think they have to trade him in the next 5 days. I think it'll happen before the weekend is out. If there are really that many teams and all of the smoke and fire around him is true, Drury's going to take the best offer from somebody in the next 3 days.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, we'll see how that unfolds, and we'll be back next week to preview the draft, and we'll discuss any other, moves that are made, because this should be before the NHL goes quiet and cottage season begins in mid-July. This should be a very busy couple of weeks for the Rangers. There's a lot of, there's a lot of potential for trades to go down, for major moves to be made. There's also a lot of potential for the Rangers to just kind of stand pat and see how things play out. So should be interesting. Dave and I and potentially JL will be back next week to talk about it all. And we just want to, as always, thank you all for listening to Live from the Blue Seats, and we'll see you next week.